talking point tonight on India at 9, the Modi government's big challenge. How is it going to overcome this power crisis? Okay, let me introduce my panel to you this evening. Joining us tonight is Shakti Sinha. He's the former Principal Secretary, Power and Finance for Delhi. Joining us from the national capital, Vivek Sharma. He's the head of energy practice at Crisil Infrastructure Advisory. And Menaka Doshi is joining us on India at 9, the executive editor of CNBC TV 18. Good evening, all of you. Thanks very much for joining us here on this panel. Mr. Sinha, if I can start with you, and perhaps focus just for a moment on the minister's statement that came in the wake of those outages in the national capital. And as I said in my introduction, when there is outage here in Delhi, neither the media nor any government can afford to ignore it. But the crux really of his solution, and in the short term, the solution is perhaps the fact that there is a need to augment the output and tap into some of the same resources. Would you agree that in the short term, this is a fine solution, but this is quick fix and this is band-aid in that sense?
No, but it's not about getting more output in the sense that we are not short of power in this country, definitely not in the city of Delhi.
True.
What is problematic is that our systems are now fully stretched, and therefore when a storm takes place and 3 of the lines go down and 10 towers go down, we simply cannot divert power through other paths to reach all the areas.
True.
And that is why we have been having this unscheduled power cuts in a big way. So I think one, as you said, your point number one is very important. In the short term, immediate crisis management is rotational, transparent load shedding. Number two also would be to really on a war footing get some of those things back online as soon as possible using emergency methods of procurement, and therefore put as much of the system on regular, because rotational load shedding is a short term thing. You really can't expect people in this city
True.
to sit back and say, okay, for the next 2 months, sit back and, have
Absolutely.
shortages.
Mr. Sinha, I just want to press you a little further on this. And I agree to the point that many of the experts have made, really, that this particular storm that came in on the 30th of May has disrupted transmission, has posed a big problem to the government. But I want to take you back to last year in that sense. It was equally hot, temperatures almost about 40 to 42 degrees. It's gone up to 47.8. And the Ministry of Power seems to be suggesting that there is an unexpected heat wave. Do you really believe, or do you really buy that argument that this difference in temperature would really make a significant change in demand as far as Delhi is concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. It does make a tremendous amount of difference in demand. It pushes the peak over a much longer period. And worse, actually, what happens is that the transformers don't get a time to cool down, both on account of additional load, so they're operating at 90%, and two, on temperature grounds also, if the day and the night is so hot, that the transformer needs to cool down. It doesn't cool down, and therefore can break down far more easily. So that high temperatures is the real problem, which anybody will tell you who is on the field.
Okay. Vivek, let me get you in, and I don't want to focus only on Delhi. The fact is that much of this programming, much of the government's focus also is a bit of an annual summer slogan. We concentrate a lot on it when it comes to the peak season, and in the off-peak season, many of us, including the media, go off to sleep. Is there a sense that there is a strong, comprehensive procurement policy when it comes to different sections in this particular sector?
Sure. I think Mr. Sinha already mentioned about the scenario in Delhi, but pan-India, if you look at the existing scenario, most of the distribution utilities need to have a very comprehensive power procurement planning in place, which not only looks at the base load, but also how to meet the peak load requirement. We are like right now in these 2 months, and we are all talking of in each state that there is a load shedding. But there is lack of complete planning on that account, and I think a lot of things could be done on the distribution front in all the states in India.
Menaka, let me bring you in, and I want to go back to what the power minister said, blaming actually the UPA government for a lack of investment when it came to any part of this power sector. There's also a talk here in Delhi that perhaps the previous regime had given a stickler to the discoms that there can simply be no outages when it comes to an election year, and now this is the new Modi government having to face the music for that one.
You know, Anupha, I don't think it's as simple a problem as to put the burden of it on any one government. While it's very tempting to do so with the UPA because they were in power for 10 years, let's not forget that state governments are equally responsible for power in their states. So I'm not sure that it's that easy to assign the full burden of the problem on the UPA. Though I might add to that, yes, they had 10 years of being in power and 10 years to sort out India's power problems, and there has been marginal progress, if one may say, on that. These are, you know, if you ask me what the big problem is, I'd say it's simply answered in 3 words: investment, investment, investment. But if you went to the sort of the detail of that response, it would mean that our problems begin with issues like coal supply, and they go all the way to transmission losses. There is a bailout that is currently underway with state transmission companies to reduce the 2 trillion rupee debt hangover on these companies, and that has only met with partial success. It is taking very, very long to work through this. So our state electricity boards, our state electricity transmission companies are all suffering under lots of debt. Part of the problem is because of government intervention in pricing. We're not able to price power for consumers in a fashion where it's viable for people to continue producing power. So it's a multifaceted problem. Investment, investment, investment can only improve if we clear up all of these policies.
Right.
It requires somebody with strength at the center to sit down with the states and resolve this. It's not a new problem. We've been talking about it for 10 years now, maybe 12, 15, and it still hasn't gone away, Anubha.
You know, Menika, I just want to push you further on that, because you brought out that point of the very precarious state electricity boards and the complete financial disarray it is in. In a sense, it seems like a bit of a complex problem, because a state like Uttar Pradesh may be providing just about 4 to 5 hours of electricity, but the flip side to it is it doesn't have the capacity to pay for more than that.
Well, you know, let me ask you the question. Why doesn't it have the capacity to pay for more than that? When will we stop seeing political intervention in the pricing of power? I'm not saying power must not be subsidized for those people who deserve cheaper power.
True.
But we need to stop seeing political intervention for the pricing. Only when we are willing to pay for power a price that covers the cost of power will we see generation come online. Look, we had a fabulous Electricity Act designed by none other than Suresh Prabhu in 2003. And I'll ask the experts on your panel, how much of what was promised and the opportunities in that act have actually been fulfilled over the last many years, 10 years?
Vivek, do you want to come in on that? Because I know you wanted to focus on the fact that we need to take tariff out of the way and focus on infrastructure.
Yeah, I think a lot of things as mentioned that, you know, we have Electricity Act in place, and one of the key requirement of the act was to tariff to reflect the cost of supply for each distribution company. But unfortunately, if you see that, you know, we after 10 years or 11 years of that act, we are still struggling on that account. Or every unit which is sold to consumer, on an average we lose almost a rupee per unit in the country, and that's a huge number. So if we are losing money on each power which is supplied, it becomes difficult to add up new capacity and put that in the you know, sell it to the consumers. As you rightly mentioned that, you know, if you see most of the states are preferring load shedding than to buy power from the grid, which is still available on the generation side. So I think more of the effort is required on the distribution front, both on the commercial side where we need to work on the tariff part, whether it comes through subsidy or, you know, direct intervention, or also on the infrastructure side, as you mentioned. There is the amount of investment which is required in T&D sector, I think, is something which state DISCOM really need to work on priority, along with the power procurement planning, which is almost 80% of the entire cost.
Okay, let me join the dots and take that back to Shakti Sinha, because Mr. Sinha, you know, ironically the focus here, at least in the national capital over the last 1 year or so, really has been on tariffs, has been on discoms, has been on fudging of records, has been on rates, etc.
Absolutely. You know, what is the terrible thing which has happened is Delhi used to have massive power cuts in the 90s, massive power cuts. Over the last 10 years, we've really, the situation has changed a lot. Suddenly, tariff became an issue 1.5 years ago for political reasons. The entire focus went on tariffs. Now, please remember, Delhi buys all its power from government companies. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can. Go
Hello.
ahead. Yes, sir, we can. Go on.
Oh, actually, suddenly I went. Okay. Delhi buys all its power from public sector generation companies.
True.
So there's really not much scope for fudging of accounts. There may be fudging of accounts as far as some capex is concerned. Fair enough. If you catch them fudging, penalize them as per law. But since you're not doing that and you focused only on tariff and not on the quality of power, what has happened today? After 1 year today, Delhi is actually facing power shortages because the system is now groaning. For 2 years, we could supply power at peak at 5,700 megawatts. This year at 5,300, the system is breaking down. Why? Because we have not invested enough, and even the investments made, we are flogging them and we are not maintaining them enough. So when you put all of this together, and Delhi is a classic case which was on smooth run, but because you did not hike tariffs for 5 years, they were not cost effective, you violated the terms of the distribution license under the FITI Act.
Okay.
And fine, now you're in a situation where it's going to be very, very difficult to put it back on track other than through emergency measures, which is, I mean, this is absolutely a very farcical situation.
So difficult to put it back on track, but I'm going to take that phrase that you used, that the system in a sense is simply groaning, and there would be many who would say that Delhi in a sense is still pampered. I'm back on the video wall because I want to give you a national picture of what the deficit looks like. This is these are figures that are coming in from 2010, 2011, right up to 2012, 2013, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and finally the state of Andhra Pradesh. Of course, we're looking before the state went through a bifurcation. Delhi currently has a shortfall of 848 megawatt power deficit in India. Just throwing out some numbers for you. Only Gujarat and Chhattisgarh are providing 24-hour power supply. Vivek, I want to come to you with these figures that are still flashing on our video wall. You know, it's a question that many years ago I had put to Mr. Prabhu as perhaps a cub reporter. What is a deficit? Is a 4-hour power outage a deficit, or is a 4-hour power supply going to be considered a deficit?
Yeah, I think we still in almost the same situation. The true measure of deficit will be if we supply power 24/7. Whereas, as you see, many of the states in India, the power supply to rural areas is 6 to 10 hours a day, which eventually means that you are talking of a deficit when you are already supplying almost half a day of power. And therefore, you know, I'm not focusing at all in my discussion on Delhi, and we have to go beyond Delhi and look at this issue in a much bigger and larger picture.
Absolutely.
The states are reeling under power cuts. They are not procuring power. They are resorting to load shedding. People are used to getting power for less hours of supply. And if you ask me a true deficit will be far more if you look at the unrestricted demand in the country.
Menika, so in what is considered the malnourished power map of this country, where do we see, or what do we say is the black hole? Is the black hole a generation capability or a generation capacity deficit, or is the black hole really a transmission constraint? Or is it a mix of both? Sorry.
I think we have 3 black holes. We have a black hole in generation, we have a black hole in transmission and in distribution, Anubha. All of these spaces need investment. We've doubled generation capacity over the last 10 years, but we're still far behind. Many of the power plants in our country are suffering from a coal shortage. Even though we're one of the world's largest coal reserves, we have to import our coal from outside because of the mishandling of the way Coal India is run. So the mismanagement of Coal India has meant that we have to import coal from outside, and coal-based power, thermal power, is I think more than half, 60% of the power in this country. So we've got to fix the problem on the generation side. We've got to make access to fuel like coal, which is one of our strengths, available in an economically viable fashion so that power production is priced better. We've had examples over the last year of power plants of both Tata and Adani which were importing coal from outside the country, having been able to go to the regulator and get an order to increase prices simply because dynamics changed outside the country. This is foolish because we have one of the world's largest coal reserves sitting here in India. So that's in a glimpse, that is the generation problem in India. The other big problem is, of course, transmission and distribution, and that problem is multifaceted. The lack of investment, theft, political intervention in pricing of power. All of these things matter. The state of our state transmission boards, they are in very poor shape, overloaded with debt. There have been schemes in the last 2 years mooted by the centre to try and restructure their debt, but these are slow-moving schemes. States need to get on board and want to reform their power sector to be able to provide continuous power supply to their people. This takes a lot of effort, and I don't see any of the states doing this on a war footing. If you look at the shortage that is currently projected for this year, you're going to see a negative 6%, so a deficit of 6% in the north of India. This is CEA statistics.
True.
Western India is going to see a deficit of maximum 1%. Southern India, 6.8%. Eastern India, 1.3%. I mean, we desperately need power in this country. A World Bank IEA report said that 300 million people in India are lacking power supply. 300 million
I'm just
people
going
have no access
to
to
make
power.
you pause there and take that bit about you said that states need to get on board, states need to reform. And Mr. Sinha, come in here on this one because, you know, in spite of this big mandate, many of these solutions are going to be dependent on the states when it comes to tariffs, when it comes to subsidies. All of this actually rests with the state, and New Delhi's influence is going to be very, very limited in that sense.
Absolutely. New Delhi can use the bully pulpit, but at the end of the day, it's a state problem, and the state regulators must be allowed to function. Unless they function, you will not have cost-effective tariffs. If you don't have cost-effective tariffs, you will not invest in infrastructure at the distribution level, particularly, not so much transmission level. Problem is distribution much more, and if you do, and therefore people will lack power. You know, so you definitely need the states to be strengthened. Government of India has tried to help them out last year by this bulk package of 1,95,000 crores. Which is you take off half the debt of the state electricity boards, issue bonds against it, and let the banks take some haircut. It's still not working out because the states have to take a lot of hard decisions, which some are doing so, but others are not prepared, and they're prepared to let people be without power rather than actually pay. And it's the opportunity cost of not having power or having alternate methods of power, your own diesel generator, is actually far more than if you allow tariffs to go up to be cost effective. A quick point, I'm not sure whether the CEA gets a figure of 848 megawatts of deficit power in Delhi. Delhi at any given time is surplus. Look at the website of Northern Regional Load Dispatch Center. Delhi always has a surplus, which is why we have to pay for power. Because you don't want Delhi to have a shortage. You
don't have Delhi.
So we buy power from all over the country.
Okay.
But we don't have the systems.
You know, I'm going to try and stitch back this debate and try and wrap it up, and I want you all to engage in a little bit of crystal ball gazing in the sense. The next few weeks, the temperatures are only going to rise. Already there is a prediction of a deficit monsoon. In a few weeks from now, the impact of that deficit monsoon is going to set in, and any government, I know this government hasn't put up that backup plan really out in the public, but any government that puts together a backup plan will be conserving the water level in reservoirs. And as Menaka pointed out, we'll be looking at coal plants to defer, coal plants in a sense to defer perhaps some of those maintenance shutdowns. This really is part of any government's backup plan. I know, Mr. Sinha, when we were discussing this, you said that you would want to hide in the next couple of days as the situation unravels itself.
Absolutely. I think no government really can prepare for this position. You know, you need hydel power for peak times. Thermal plants work at a certain level. You can't ask them to back down or suddenly go up. To ask them to shut down, 36 hours it takes to get back online. So you badly need hydropower. With the monsoons being subnormal as expected in most of the country, other than the northeast and parts of the northwest, I think we're going to be very, very difficult time in coping with the problem. And we can sort out Delhi's immediate problem, which is fine. But the country as a whole, especially the needs of industry, that somehow gets on the back burner. Industry needs are so important. How can you have GDP back on track if you don't have industry coming back into the positive? Absolutely. Okay, Vivek, so it's not going to be easy.
It's not going to be easy. Vivek, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think it is not going to be easy, definitely, and I would, again go back and focus on the point that we need to have an integrated generation energy planning, power procurement planning, where we address the base load through coal generation and peak through other measures, including hydro as well as gas plants. We are right now in a situation where a lot of plants which are idle and is want of gas and they are not running, which are very very much technically sound option to meet the intermediate and peak requirement. Similarly, there are options which we know we need to explore specifically for India, which include renewable energy, including solar and wind, which can help to augment the overall capacity and planning. So the core point I think will remain that we need to have a power procurement planning in place, which addresses base, inter and peak load based on what are the all supply options which we have in this country, including coal.
Menaka, you want to get in the final word of what the next couple of weeks could look like?
Look, I don't know about the next couple of weeks. I'm sure it's not pleasant in Delhi at all. But I'll tell you three things, and I think all of us play a part in this. Consumers across the country, whether they're middle-class citizens like you and me, or they are farmers, or they're industrial consumers, they need to figure out whether they're willing to pay the price for power. Because if you don't pay for a utility, you don't get continuous, reliable supply of it, and then you suffer. So that's one aspect. Politicians need to figure out that they cannot survive and keep hoping to be elected to power again and again on the basis of this nonsense subsidized situation whereby you are offering cheap power, but it's available for only 1 hour of the day, and that hurts everybody in the process. And finally, I'll tell you what the impact on GDP could likely be. Anubha, I'll leave you with a number. I think FICCI did a report last year, late last year, and they estimated that India loses about $68 billion on account of power issues or power shortages. That's roughly 0.5% of our GDP. If we could fix this, it would be such a big boon, not just for you and all your colleagues in Delhi who are sweltering in the heat, but for industry, but for farmers. So, I mean, we've been saying this for 10, 12 years now in this country. I just hope somebody has the willpower to get down to executing the solutions, because the solutions are well known.
The solutions are well known, and I think we'll have to leave it there. But thanks very much, Menaka, Shakti Sinha and Vivek, for joining us here on this India at 9 panel. As we're heading into this quick break, perhaps some of those graphics could come back on the screen. The 5 big suggestions that we have put up, collating really what experts have said all through the day on this Powerless in India campaign, many of them talking about the shifting of focus from tariffs to infrastructure, but prime among them, the big focus on your screens right now, do that rotational load shedding. This is a short-term quick fix band-aid solution. Number 3 really has been a unanimous one, shift from tariffs to infrastructure. Of course, in Delhi, much of the debate has been on tariffs, but the point that perhaps Menaka left us with, you need to pay for this particular utility, manage the demand and encourage energy efficiency. And 5th among them, improve finances of the state electricity boards. We possibly can't have a situation where state electricity boards in some states are willing to just supply 2 to 3 hours of power and say they don't have the capacity to buy more. Remember, in many parts of the country, for instance in East India, it could be far less. I know the state of Manipur barely gets electricity for 2 to 3 hours in a day. We'll try and continue this campaign. Remember, you can continue to send us your suggestions on our website, ibnlive.com. Those figures still coming on your screens of the power deficit that various parts of this country continue to face. We'll take a quick break here on India at 9. When we come back, there's going to be a roundup of the big national stories. Parents are extremely anxious, a lot of agony, an update on the Manali dam tragedy, where there's obviously no hope of survivors, but the search is still on for the 20 missing students.